try not to do a Russell Brand here. Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Nigel, Rosie, and Josh. And can I say it's a huge honour to be invited to this event and to speak to you about the industry that I love and gave up a promising career for, namely live comedy. My name is Mark Tughan, and I'm the founder and CEO of a small but slightly significant group of live entertainment venues called the Glee Club, specialising mainly in comedy. We started in 1994. We may only be 5 venues, but we've managed to become the biggest group of mid-sized venues and would probably be described as the market leader. I say slightly significant because although we're only 5 venues, we're one of the largest bookers of what we would call circuit talent in the country. And because we're the biggest group of comedy clubs, people in the past have looked to us to see what I hope would be considered to be best practice. I want to say first, the world of live comedy is by and large a happy place. After all, we are in the business of making people laugh. The sector isn't, from what I can see, tearing itself apart in quite the same way as seems to be happening in other areas, music and perhaps publishing. And our own brushes with cancel culture, whilst real, tend to be slightly more occasional. This is, of course, notwithstanding the fact that one of the biggest cancel stories ever involves one of our own, namely comedy writer Graham Linehan. I don't think we even need to go there now. The man has been vindicated 1,000 times over, and it's a source of regret, to me at least, that some of his peers in our industry still can't seem to find the strength to acknowledge any regret for the way he was treated. Our recent brushes with cancel culture started with me receiving a fatwa from somebody from the Small Heath area of Birmingham who called on us to cancel a show by the Dutch comedian Hans Tughan, best known for his absurdist, provocative and confrontational style, but also for allegedly mocking Islam. In this case, we did proceed, but I would point out that the West Midlands Police's attitude when we spoke to them was that we should just save ourselves the hassle and cancel that show. They said they would not commit to any presence whatsoever on the night of the show to keep an eye on the threatened protest, which in the end, thankfully, did not materialise. Next up, Jerry Sadowitz. His show was famously dropped by the Pleasance at the Edinburgh Festival in 2022. He already had a tour planned for after the festival, and we had booked him at 2 of our venues. Cue panic amongst my management team. How on earth were we meant to deal with this? It was front page news. In the end, we also proceeded. There was little public backlash, but this was when the problem morphed into a bit of an HR issue. What about the staff? Should we be subjecting them to this potentially offensive comedian? It's a fair question. In the end, we reminded staff that taking shifts was optional, as was actually watching the show, but it didn't stop a couple of staff duly watching, taking great offence, and then making complaints. My HR advice at the time was that we had taken the steps required of, and I quote, a reasonable and considerate employer. So what's the problem, I hear you say? You're not cancelling shows, you're holding up, you're holding your nerve. We have recently booked Britain's most cancelled comedian, Andrew Lawrence. This was something, however, where I personally had to intervene to assure that it was booked. First it was, he's not funny. Then it was about a backlash. Then it became, what about the staff? Again. It's now also become, get this, what about the audience? The audience of deplorables. What if they abuse the staff? It was abundantly clear that this is being presented to me as just too much hassle. Let's just leave it. And that's what angered me and made me think. We could be, and I suspect we were, declining shows preemptively, and thus we were censoring ourselves and some acts without it even being known. No paper trails, no proof. And that, to me, whilst not the crime of the century, is insidious. I decided that's just wrong. Already a free speech advocate, to me, quietly swerving a show means we've already surrendered or lost the argument for free expression because it's assumed, preordained even, that such a booking will end up causing so much grief and we're just better off not doing it in the first place. In other words, it's the art that never happens. It also struck me that similar conversations may also have been happening within my business without me even knowing. I simply can't be across every inquiry, every judgment call. that shows could just quietly be being swerved, quietly declined based solely on behind closed doors whispers and, let's be honest, political prejudices, struck me as quite beyond the pale. Look, as a private business, we're fully entitled to book who and what we want, but we're also gatekeepers, and as such, I feel we have a responsibility to the wider arts world to ensure that we don't just swerve and avoid controversial or alternative shows because of fear of a backlash or HR hassle. This is where freedom in the arts comes in. Let me be clear, I don't think it was always the case of my management team going out of their way to deplatform people, although sometimes I wonder, but they too were, indeed they are, paralysed with fear. Fear of activists, fear that the public would disapprove in some way, fear of harming our reputation, and also fear that we would simply be entering an HR hellhole. I can tell you, as a small business, we have little time for endless HR, let alone costly PR for reputation management. So when I saw that FITA had really thought this through and done serious legwork in terms of intellectual underpinnings, practical advice, and actual tools to assist venues, to me, it was a no-brainer. Most people in my sector are tiny businesses operating on shoestrings, both financially and in management bandwidth, and thus to have practical guidance and institutional backing is critical. I'm going to go one step further and say that, in my opinion, seeing venues signing up to a freedom of expression agenda like this is also exactly what the public wants, and it's what the public expects. My sense is that people are fed up with the thought police, they're fed up with the taste police, and they're fed up of overtly, or in some cases covertly, censoring shows or so-called problematic acts out of the cultural sphere. I hope and expect that venues which do positively champion freedom of expression will be rewarded by their customers, and that venues that opt out of freedom of expression will suffer accordingly and deservedly at the box office, as well as reputationally for their reluctance to embrace true diversity, namely diversity of thought and opinion, whether legally protected or not. To me, this is good business as well as the right thing to be doing. In summary, I think cancel culture has made swathes of the arts, mine included, hugely risk-averse. And in comedy, if you don't take risks, it gets dull, it gets safe, it just gets a bit boring. For me, this is about regaining the confidence to take risks again, bringing the public with us, and in the end, winning a bit of trust back from consumers, some of whom I think believe comedy has just become too safe and operating within boundaries set by the groupthink of the bubble it has become comfortable in. I want to bring back the sense that in a comedy club, almost anything goes. Funny is funny. But behind all these decisions and pressures is the artist, and the question of what kind of culture we're asking artists to create within. So it's with great pleasure that I'd like to hand over to a legend, Roisin Murphy.